So this is the no-till. This is even the fallow plot, so there's been nothing growing in it other than these few weeds since we sprayed it last. But yeah, incredible difference both in terms of moisture that's available up at the surface and then down low as well. And the other cool thing too is these big old chunks that look kind of like they're big and bulky like they would be in there. Just break them right in my hand. It's soft and malleable.
How long has this been no-till?
This would be its third year in no-till. So you can have a really impactful change in a short period of time. One of the things we found in some of our previous work here was that no-till can, in some cases, match the production of your conventional systems right away. That's been very consistent after irrigation. Had no loss in production when switching to no-till. There was a slight lag actually in the wet year on dryland systems when we studied it. But then in a drought year, the no-till system matched the production of our conventionally tilled system. And that was in alfalfa and with some cover crops as well. So it's very promising. I will say the downside to this type of no-till system is we've had to increase the amount of herbicide we're applying, and it's left us looking for some other options to try and get a longer residual, so we're not having to be out here 4 times a year spraying Roundup to kill all this witchgrass and kochia and Russian thistle. So, but then I guess we'll look under the cover crops too and see if it looks like there's a difference. You can see when you move to the cover crop plots, it's not as moist to the soil. That's something that's actually pretty common in literature where they study wheat fallow systems. Part of the reason that you have fallow is to conserve moisture during the off year so that you increase your production and yields during the year when you're planting your grain crops. Again, in our system, we don't fallow almost ever, so that conversation isn't important in our crop context, but you can see the difference in the soil. It is drier. But if you come look at this, you'll see, like Caitlin was talking about with the plant roots, we're already starting to get down further. We're much below, or we're past that 4-inch to 6-inch compaction layer that we saw in the conventional strip. So I would just say keep in mind this is 2 passes of equipment and no disturbance of the soil at any depth other than seeding. So the coulters on the front of the no-till drill obviously opening up and providing a seed bed. But outside of that, how many passes
would you have in conventional?
Yeah, so the conventional system is going to include on any given year either a chisel plowing or a plowing of some sort at one point. That hasn't been every year, but then it's always included 2 disking attempts and then finishing with a cultivator. And that's largely because this soil is so hard and compact and there's so much clay in it that in order to get it down and workable and then be able to plant into it, we're having to disc twice to chop up those big chunks. A lot of times you're able just to disc it once and then cultivate it twice or something to that effect, and maybe even get away with cultivating it once. And then the other thing that we typically do in our conventional plots is we pack it with a roller harrow, and that just kind of firms up the seed bed a little bit. So.
Well, is this mix the same as the other one, or is it
This is a different mix. This is a hay mix, yeah. So this was supposed to have pretty much only things that would pass through a swather easily and dry down uniformly.
If you're going to plant oats for a cover crop, a hay crop, or anything, what is the best time in this state to plant?
Talking dry land specifically?
No, irrigated.
Irrigated, you can plant within the recommended windows for each of the crop types pretty safely. So that's going to depend on species. Oats, like these cool season species, we've had pretty good luck when we go and plant it in late April or early May. Unless it's a winter variety of a forage, obviously then you're going to be planting it in August or September when moisture allows. This stuff I try and plant even when it's a cool season variety, or when it's a cool season variety, I try and plant it in April, just because most of our moisture, if I wait until May, then I can't get into the field to plant it, and then it's too late afterwards for me to have any substantial growth as you're seeing here. So.
Do you always mix the warm and cool season grasses?
I do, and the reason for that is on our previous research, one of the benefits that we saw in that was comparing a wet year to a dry year, In the wet year, those cool season species came up, and we were able to graze them, and then the warm season species kind of filled in after grazing and provided some additional cover later in the year. In a dry year, the cool season species suffered pretty bad, and the warm season species came up still and produced a pretty similar tonnage to what we saw in the wet year. And that was with that diverse cover crop mix that you see in this plot next to me. And so the idea behind that kind of is similar to what you would think about in a natural system, right? You have a blend of annual and perennial species that are a blend of cool season and warm season species as well. And so by having a mix of that, you kind of spread your risk, and then you're able to face a more diverse set of conditions. That's the ecological theory behind it, I guess. Whether that plays out in every instance, the literature is kind of back and forth on. But it's a good question. It's something I found success in doing, but it's not something that I think everybody does or has success with either. And I guess you mixing seed mixes, you probably have thoughts on that.
But together, because if you look here where it doesn't have the competition,
yeah,
this is the potential you could have with your warm seasons. But when you plant those cool seasons with them, sorghum Sudan is really sensitive in those early stages to competition, and so you actually really suppress it. And then by the time that it's able to grow, the oats have taken all the moisture. So you don't put in the high enough rate in to get a good coverage of oats or the cool season grass, that it actually overall decreases your biomass production from what I've seen.
Yeah, and so I will say the other thing is the soils on that site where we found that production was similar in a dry year and a wet year with both warm and cool seasons mixed was a little bit sandier than this is. This is heavy clay, and so there's definitely a difference in how this is playing out. Again, we're just trying a bunch of different things, trying to see what works best. I've had success doing it this way. I've also had failures doing it this way, if you want to call it a failure, I guess. But yeah, it's a great question, great thought. And the other point to that end is the timing. You know, how that plays in with your crops too. Because if I'm planting a cash crop, like we talked about before, like a winter cash crop, such as this wheat would have been, then I have to have all this forage off in like amount of 2 weeks from now, probably, depending on when the rain comes. If I am not planning on putting anything in here till spring, then I have a longer window. I can plan it a little bit differently, right? And then go in with my crops in the spring, maybe plant something after I take it off. There's several different strategies, but you've got to figure out what works within your cropping regimes.